Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I want to welcome you to the Distinguished Poetry Series at Passaic County Community College, the Poetry Center in Paterson. I want to say that all these programs are made possible by grants from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the funding from Passaic County Community College, and individual donations and gifts from people who are part of our community of writers and who come to programs often and who want to support what we're doing. I'm very pleased to welcome January Gill O'Neill. She is an associate professor at Salem State University and the author of Rewinding, which came out in 2018, Misery Island 2014, and Underlife 2009, all published by Covent Carey Press. From 2012 to 2018, she served as the executive director of the Massachusetts Poetry Festival and currently serves on the boards of AWP, Mass Poetry, and Montessori's College of Art. Her poems and articles have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem of the Day series, American Poetry Review, Green Mountains Review, Poetry, and Sierra Magazine, among others. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Kavli Khanum, and the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund. O'Neill was the 2019-2020 John and Vermeer Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi, Oxford. She lives with her two children in Beverly, Massachusetts. And I'm very happy to have January here. And she just gave us a wonderful workshop and very informative workshop. And I think that she helped us all take a new look at our own poems and the way we're writing and the kinds of ways we can move in new directions. Let's welcome January Gill O'Neill.
Thank you, Maria. That is lovely. Thank you, Smia, for hosting. Thank you for coming today. And I'll just say that, I've been a long time admirer of Maria's. I think, as a poet, she's amazing, but also as a literary citizen and somebody who really believes in the poetry community, her contribution is invaluable. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Jane.
So I'm going to read, something old, something new, and hop around from a few different places. So since it is the International Women's Month, this poem, the Academy of American Poets put this on their Instagram feed, and that was a nice thing that they did. This is one of my poems that was written for my friend Colleen Michaels. In the company of women. Make me laugh over coffee. Make it a double. Make it froth so it seethes in our delight. Make my cup overflow with your small happiness. I want to hoot and snort and cackle and chuckle. Let your laughter fill me like a bell. Let me listen to your ringing and singing as Billie Holiday croons above our heads. Sorry, the blues are nowhere to be found. Not tonight, not here. No makeup, no tears. Only contours, only curves. Each sip takes back a pound. Each dry roasted swirl takes our soul. Can I have a refill? Just one more? Let the bitterness sink to the bottom of our lives. Let us take this joy to go. That was a poem. She and I had coffee the night before I found out that I was going to get a divorce. So that one's important to me for a lot of reasons, but I'm surprised at where that poem is ending up these days. This next poem is actually about the divorce. This is a poem called Brave, and I have to explain a few things about it. The poem's in 5 sections. When my fiance at the time and I were getting married, I was supposed to get married September 15th, 2001, but 9/11 happened. So that night we made the decision to drive from Massachusetts to Norfolk, Virginia, where I'm from and where the wedding was going to be held that Saturday. But if you remember that time, there was so much confusion, nothing was happening, nothing was flying or going on. This poem has jumps in time, and there's a raccoon in the poem, and I have a swear in the poem. The last stanza is also 3 lines. Brave. A thin layer of ash, fine debris, probably bone, coated the windshield as we passed exit after exit for the Garden State Parkway. We took detours and back roads while police blocked every on-ramp. Blue lights pulsing. Officers in yellow hazard vests stood next to their squad cars as we drove past midnight. My soon-to-be husband, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and me in a 1992 Grand Marquis on our way to Virginia. On the radio, nothing but news and static. All of us silent, sleepy, edgy, uncertain, both absent and present on an empty highway driving past New York City. I would never tell my daughter that some nights I lie awake listening for the raccoon I know is in the attic but pretend isn't there. The scratching, the heavy scampering, she hears it too. If he were here, Daddy would check things out. If he were here, Mommy would not feel so lonely. We pretend to be brave, bang on the walls, play loud music to scare it away, pray it does not have kids. Marriages fail. There is no one else to go up there and get the little fucker. On our day in court, my lawyer was late, so the judge moved our case to the afternoon docket. We sat for hours, you on the left side, me on the right, listening to failure after failure, the quick dissolve of marriages into oblivion. I remember thinking, Hallmark doesn't make a card for this. The moment when the judge calls your name and uses words such as irreconcilable, broken, and final, and a swell. No, a surge of tears breaks as the judge uncouples us. You cried too. Neither of us looked at the other or spoke. When I turned around, you were gone. You had left the building. Before we arrived at the hotel, we took engagement photos in our wrinkled clothes. And before that, we watched the sunrise as we crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. And before that, we listened to Howard Stern around 5 a.m., broadcast live, trying to find the right words, any words. And before that, you took the wheel from your brother so he could get some sleep. And before that, silence. And before that, you held my hand as we rode in the back seat. And before that, we were not allowed on the Garden State Parkway or anywhere. And before that, we stopped for gas, sandwiches, checked the check engine light somewhere in Connecticut. And before that, there was a toll on the Tobin Bridge. And before that, I was on the phone with the maid of honor who would ride the bus from Texas to Virginia to arrive by Saturday. I thought she was crazy. And before that, I was on the phone with my father who said, be careful, and I love you. And before that, no flights were allowed out of Logan Airport or anywhere. And before that, I said yes. And before that, you said yes. And before that, I asked, should we go through with the wedding? I would never tell my daughter male raccoons have no part in raising their young. How to love. After stepping into the world again, there is that question of how to love, how to bundle yourself against the frosted morning, the crunch of icy grass underfoot, the scrape of cold wipers along the windshield and convert time into distance. What song to sing down an empty road as you begin your morning commute? And is there enough in you to see, really see, the 3 wild turkeys crossing the street with their featherless heads and stilt-like legs in search of a morning meal? Nothing to do but hunker down, safely cross. As they amble away, you wonder if they want to be startled back into this world. Maybe you do too, waiting for all this to give way to love itself, to look into the eyes of another and feel something, the pleasure of a new lover in the unbroken night, your wings folded around him on the other side of this ragged January, as if a long sleep has ended. I used to see turkeys in my neighborhood so much, I thought they were my spirit animal. And to this day, I think they still are. So I'm going to read a few newer poems. I think I'm starting out, in a little bit of a place of, of separation and divorce, but, eventually we move on. So when I was given the fellowship, the John and Renee Grisham Fellowship at the University of Mississippi, I was there for 9 months with my kids towards the tail end of the pandemic, but I did meet somebody down there. So I have a boyfriend and we have been dating ever since, very long distance. So this is the how to love part. This is the next phase of that. Mississippi season. He says I hold my mind well, likes that I put my kids first and have never tried drugs. The lilt in his southern drawl intoxicates me. He likes not being able to have all of me, makes him want me more. Broken finds broken, I say. So when he kisses my neck, along my clavicle, down to my breast, I break all over again. After a drought of no kissing, no touch. How not being chosen can dim any light. For years, I told myself a story I could live with, thought of myself a kind of carnival fish in a plastic bag, floating in my own still water, waiting to be loved. Dumb luck that someone flips a red ring on the mouth of a glass jar, and just like that, I am kissing again, kissing a man so luminous, so beautifully flawed, I can barely look at him. And my mind, done with all its stories, turns to the carnal as I rim the hinge of his lips with my tongue and dive into this quenching. So when I was in Mississippi, I was captured with the landscape, and I'm from Virginia and live in Massachusetts, but there was something about being in the deep South that was revelatory and amazing and difficult and traumatic. And, Mississippi is exactly what you might think it would be, but it's more than what you might think it would be. So, so part of my time down there was really learning about different places, what the Delta really means, the legacy of slavery, and the Emmett Till story. And that was a lot of my writing. So these next few poems are about my time there. Low Delta country. Driving along Highway 6, I'm not sure where the town begins and ends. Heavy trees lean ground close, choked by kudzu. Roots growing over enslaved land, wild daffodils sprouting, across long demolished plantations and working farms, plots pocked by mostly unmarked graves. I should have chased that laughter at the gas station and said hello to whoever stood there, but had nowhere to go but inside. Only towns, like only children, carry the loneliness of broken windows in their eyes. They disappear when the buzzards stop their soar over shorn fields, give up mid-air, and drop like a wine bottle. Goldenrod, deer bones, billboard for now defunct businesses in the town's one strip mall. Maybe some places should rewild. In the land of John Deere, machines pick clean what the enslaved did by hand. Irrigation rigs big as pterodactyls sit idle after the harvest. Tufts of cotton fleck the landscape like cheap insulation. Part of the story, the Emmett Till story for me, happened before I arrived. As it turned out, 3 Ole Miss students vandalized the marker at the point where they approximate Emmett Till's body was pulled out of the water. And so Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy, Black boy, who was visiting from Chicago, went into a store with cousins, and reportedly whistled or spoke to or was disrespectful to a white woman, the owner of the shop. So a day or two later, the owner's husband and brother-in-law and maybe others dragged him out of his bed at night. He was staying with his great uncle, I think. Beat him, shot him, tied a 75-pound cotton gin fan around his neck and threw him in the Tallahatchie. And so days later, his body floated downstream and they pulled it out. When his mother reclaimed the body, they asked if she wanted a closed casket ceremony, funeral, and she said no. And so that was probably the first viral moment, or one of them, certainly for the early civil rights movement. Shortly after that, Rosa Parks refused her space on the bus. So that story, which I really did not know in depth, certainly the markers, that story happened before the spring before we went down. And so I was able to go to the rededication. But I think I'll read the story about seeing the marker. 3, the title of the poem is a subhead from a USA Today article. 3 white Ole Miss students used guns to vandalize a memorial to lynching victim Emmett Till. USA Today, July 2019. They pose their bodies as if they've just bagged their first 10-point buck. One holds a shotgun, another squats below the shot up sign, a third stands with an AR-15. 3 faces smiling, hoisting guns in front of a bullet-ridden marker. This is the site where Till's body was removed from the river. It is hunter's hours. The sign's jagged holes could slice a finger. Those students are someone's sons or brothers, not much older than the young Black boy, his body beaten, tethered to a 75-pound cotton gin fan and thrown into the Tallahatchie. This is an old story, a Southern Gothic. To deny the boy's life and then deny the marker that says he lived breaks me every time. The camera captures the night's dark cover, the tall grasses, the momentary flash illuminating their shit-eating grins and the gun barrel glint. Lifetimes of getting away with it. I should have mentioned there's a second swear. So we left as the pandemic was getting started. But we went back last year as a family and we took a ride down a portion of the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River is a mile long and, it stretches, up and down, the middle of the country. But it is just fascinating. It's not like people go out there all the time. It's not like going on a lake. But there's a wonderful touring company that will take you out. And I tell you, it was one of the most moving things I've ever done. The river remembers. Here, the water is silt brown, stretches mile wide, flat as a washed out conveyor belt, an unhemmed rumble strip. I can't read the river, can't see my hand when it plunges elbow deep to feel the cool against the Mississippi heat, hot as a dog's mouth. Here we canoe for hours through swirling eddies, watch the trash barges and towboats travel downstream. The river glistens hard as broken glass. Here, everything is fluid. In lower Mississippi, the south, where the two-lane blacktop cuts through an infinity of flat, cotton, soybean, corn, farm, tumble-down shack. Creeks and rivers bifurcate the land like blood veins. Here, the GPS gives up. New islands form at the current's whim, and what is untouched grows lush and verdant. Willow and privet border the collapsing coastline. A carp leaps into the boat when it hears us coming. We stop here in an oxbow. Gumbo mud sticks to our feet. River rock, plastic, fossils, gar. Raccoon and coyote leave tracks in the rust-colored sand. The slaves, sold downriver, hid here, waited for their chance to escape up north, hid in caves, fled to the Twin Cities and Canada, their fate at the mercy of the river's next rise. Here's the nadir of our suffering, which started in one place to end in another. Here's where flow and marvel and history converge. This harm joy, this beautiful sadness. I didn't realize that the Mississippi was part of the Underground Railroad. So it was fascinating to be out on the water, and it's just, Mississippi's a fascinating place. It's just, its beauty and its trauma. So going back to my book, Rewilding, I'll just read a few more. This one is for my son, who is now 18. When I wrote it, he was 13. You know, I wrote it in thinking about Tamir Rice, but also all of the young Black boys who have been killed just senselessly. Hoodie. A gray hoodie will not protect my son from rain, from the New England cold. I see the partial eclipse of his face as his head sinks into the half dark and shades his eyes. Even in our quiet suburb with its unlocked doors, I fear for his safety, the darkest child on our street in the empire of blocks. Sometimes I do not know who he is anymore, traveling the back roads between boy and man. He strides a deep stride, pounds a basketball into wet pavement. Will he take his shot, or is he waiting for the open mouth, orange rim to take a chance on him? I sing his name to the night, ask for safe passage from this borrowed body into the next, and wonder who could mistake him for anything but good. A few years ago, when the Obama administration was in office, and maybe for a little time after, occasionally, maybe because I'm in New England, people would tell me that I looked like our First Lady. This is, again, a few administrations ago. And now when I read this poem, I'm so happy I have the date in the title. On being told I look like FLOTUS, New Year's Eve party 2014. Deep in my biceps, I know it's a compliment. just as I know this is an all Black people look-alike moment. So I use the minimal amount of muscles to crack a smile. All night he catches sight of me or someone like me standing next to the deconstructed cannoli and empty bottles of Prosecco. And in that moment, I understand how little right any of us have to be whoever we are. The constant tension of making our way in this world on hope and change. You're working your muscles to the point of failure, Michelle Obama once said about her workout regimen. But she knows we wear our history in our darkness, in our patience. A compliment is a compliment. This I know. Just as the clock will always strike midnight and history repeats. This is how I can wake up the next morning and love the world again. So I'll read two more. So, you know, I sometimes people ask me, you know, you write such personal poems. Are you worried about, you know, what, you know, the people in the poems might say? And my general answer is no. I don't try to write anything that will embarrass them. And in particular with my kids, I say, well, when they're old enough, you know, they can tell their own stories. I mean, photos are a little bit like, poems are a little bit like photos. It captures a moment. And so they are more than welcome to tell their perspective. Of course, now they are getting to that age where they can tell their perspective. So my biggest fear is that they'll end up on a couch, on a therapist couch in 20 years and say, my mom wrote this poem, or my mom took away the PlayStation. What my kids will write about me in their future tell-all book. And Red Sox fans know this, but I make one reference in this poem to David Ortiz, Big Papi. What my kids will write about me in their future tell-all book. They will say that no was my favorite word more than stop or eat or love. That some mornings I'd rather stay in bed, laptop on lap, instead of making breakfast, that I'd rather write than speak. They will say they have seen me naked, front side, back side, none of which were my good sides. They will say I breastfed too long. In the tell-all book my kids will write, they'll tell how I let them wrinkle like raisins in the bathtub so I could watch Big Papi at the plate. They'll talk about how I threw out their artwork, the watercolors and the turkey hands when I thought they weren't looking and when I knew there were. They'll say that my voice was a slow torture, that my singing caused them permanent hearing loss. In the tell-all book my kids will write, as surely as I am writing this, they will say I cut them off mid-sentence because I could. They'll tell you how I got down on my knees, growling my low guttural approval, how I grabbed their ears, pinched the backs of their arms, yet they never quite knew who was sadder for it. They'll quote me in saying, I cry in the shower. It's the only safe place I can go. They will say she was our sweetest disaster. They will say I love them so much it hurt. And so this last poem was the final poem, I think, of the set of poems that I wrote in Mississippi. It is also my hopeful poem towards, you know, finishing, you know, getting through the pandemic and hopefully being on the tail end of things. Glitter Road. I'll take my miracles, however they appear these days. A salamander poking its head above the bricks, the shocking blue overcoat of the season's first bluebird, a spider web unbroken. At the corner of Molly Bar and McElroy, I saw a thick trail of glitter in the curve of the right turn lane. Fuchsia, heavy shimmer, heavy shimmer refracting the noonday sun, as if laying flat a rainbow's extracted hue. Not paint or blood or a parade shedding its cheer. It's the faded streak of eyeshadow as it trails into flecks, then disappears. I think of cars passing through this moment, their undercarriages aglow with possibility. Hard not to feel good riding a glistening wave, my tires now bespeckled with a purple sheen that's tough to rid or wash away. The road ahead made beautiful by this temporary shine. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to say you have time to read one more poem if you'd like to.
Okay, I don't know what to read.
Just grab.
So I'm gonna grab something. Okay, I'll read this last poem. It's the last one in my book, Rewilding, and that's the first one I opened to. Umbrella. Last night I saw a long blue umbrella hanging on a table by its crooked handle. A green and brown strap held its collapsed ribs into place. Whose is it? No one in sight. Umbrellas carry their own currency, passed from friend to friend, a spare on a car's back seat, waiting to be used. Umbrella, from the word umbra, meaning shadow. Not a parasol or a bumbleshoot, something large, waterproof, telescopic, stretched wide, spun on its tip by my daughter in August rain. Gene Kelly kisses Debbie Reynolds under a black dome before he tosses it and begins to sing. Ariana twirls, splashes puddles, asking us to stand under hers. Does anyone ever buy an umbrella? Maybe before or during a downpour, but never after. I have seen too many left behind in frustration, poking out of trash cans, their spikes pointing skyward or flipped inside out by a harsh wind, or worse, forgotten in movie theaters or subway cars. No, there is a grace in a left behind umbrella, picked up by someone who needs it more at that particular moment, maybe when their sky is falling or caught by surprise. Once at dinner with my best friend at a Chinese restaurant, we're the last ones in the place, nothing but broken fortunes and the check in front of us. How will we make it as writers? We asked each other. Then the sky opened up, heavy drops for blocks and blocks. There in the corner, a black umbrella leaned against the glass door, waiting. As we paid the check, the man behind the counter said, "Take it." Thank you. Coincidentally, the skies just opened up here too.
January, thank you so much. That was a wonderful reading and a wonderful workshop. And we really appreciate your doing this. I know Zoom is not the ideal way to do these things, but better than not doing them at all. We thank you. I'm sure that if people didn't have their sound off, you would hear a lot of clapping. That was beautiful reading and very moving and very textured and layered. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's such a pleasure, Maria. I hope to be with you soon in person one of these days.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you, January. That was beautiful to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Of course. So I was curious if you remember what initially brought you to poetry and what continues to compel you.
The question, the answer I would give, my class or students is that I was an econ major, and I had an 8 a.m. economics class, and I was terrible in it. I hated 8 o'clock classes, so I did not do well. I thought I was going to be a business major in college, but I took creative writing. I was always good at that in high school. I studied with Toy Darricott and Ruth Stone. And Toy was really the first person to say, here's the world of poetry. She actually, I remember she played a cassette tape of Howl, and she had, printed copies. So we went through the whole Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and looked at that and I was like, wow, you can really say that, you know, you can say it, because it certainly didn't sound like anything else I had heard. It didn't sound like prose. And then she introduced our class to Sharon Olds. I'm like, you can say that in a poem, you know, you can talk about, you know, the body and being a woman in such detail and you know, in rich, vivid language like that. I was like, wow, you know, well, I think I was hooked. You know, I didn't do much writing before. I certainly read, but once I got into college, I was hooked. And then, you know, what keeps me going is that at some point I made up my mind that, like, you know, poetry is my center. So between poetry and family, that makes all of my other choices easy. So I try to do things, I take work that makes me happy. It's usually related to poetry. I take teaching assignments that are related to poetry. It allows me to spend time with kids and not get stressed out, you know. But once I knew that like poetry was what was going to feed me and sustain me, that made all of my other decisions easy. And I love words, you know, I love putting them together. I love mishearing words. I love all of it. Can't hear you. Sorry.
No, you're.
Can you hear me
No,
now?
I don't know why
Now
you're like China. Are you in China?
I'm sorry?
Now I can hear you. I can hear you now.
I guess
Marion,
I was just
can you
thinking-
make your sound go up? You're very low.
I mean, I think my sound is all the way up. Let me just see.
You know, there seems to be a little delay, like when you start talking and then your computer catches up and then we can hear you. So I can hear you now.
Okay.
So go ahead, honey.
All right. Thank you for being patient. Do you mind if I record this?
No, that's
January?
fine. That's fine.
All right. So you mentioned poetry being the thing that feeds you and sustains you. I
Mhm.
was wondering how you nourish yourself to set up that space so that you can create.
Good question. I mean, it changes. That's a question that should change over time. So I'm still sort of thinking pandemic time, you know, when we were all isolated. So, you know, we were going fewer places. You know, we didn't have to drive anywhere. We didn't have to go anywhere. We were at home for hours. We were barely taking walks because there was a point we were afraid to go out of the house. So, you know, I set up a routine and I got up at a certain point in the morning and I was at my computer and I'd get up and stretch and walk the dog and then I'd do something else and then check in with the kids and do something else. You know, so routine and practice is good for me. I don't always keep that. I mean, now that we're busy, now that we're sort of getting back to a little bit of normal, I mean, you know, we have the option of working outside of the house and I know I'm teaching in the classroom now. My schedule seems to be changing and it'll change again in the spring. So just being flexible, but really trying to do something every day for my writing, for my art. I mean, I don't know if I can create real space sometimes. I mean, sometimes I look at my schedule. I look at my schedule daily and maybe go 2 or 3 days ahead and look and see when I have blocks of time and how I want to use that time. And I may say on Monday, I want to write, but come Sunday, I'm feeling like, well, maybe I can, you know, work on my website or read a book. And that still feels like it's feeding my art. So it doesn't always end up being writing. It could be revision. It could be, you know, workshopping with friends. But I try to figure out times in the day when I can, you know, shut off the TV and shut off social media, which is really hard for me. And, you know, and try to get something done, as well as try to keep up with grading, which, you know, Maria knows. It's just, oh my goodness. Sometimes it's a killer.
It is.
So.
I like that. You can hear me right now.
Yes.
Now,
I like that, you know, establishing routines and structure in which you can be free in your creativity.
Yeah.
I was also curious if, looking back, you see any other examples, people you grew up around, your family, people who are also storytellers or love words or different ways that they document.
You know, yeah, I come from a family of shoppers. On my mom's side of the family, my grandmother used to work for a Rich's department store in Atlanta. And so whenever we went down and visited, that's what we did. We shopped. So I don't know if I think about, and my parents certainly were hardworking people. I don't think of them as storytellers. I do think of their work ethic. And I think about, being Black at a certain period where proving yourself and, trying to make it in, when you're not part of the dominating culture. I think about that a lot. I don't know if they were storytellers, but they certainly like stories, so that's kind of a roundabout answer. It's a good question.
Okay. Thank you. Let me see what other notes I took. And are you reading a certain poet right now or a certain book?
Well, right now, yeah, I am reading Amy Nezuko Matato's World of Wonders. And partially because, it's actually a wonderful book, but I'm going to be interviewing her on Wednesday at AWP. So I'm doing some prep work. So I'm going back and looking at her nonfiction, which is new, but also her poetry collections. Her last poetry collection was Oceanic by Copper Canyon. So I'm reading her right now. And then I'm also reading the 1619 Project, which is a pretty thick tome. It's a pretty thick book. And then I'm holding off because I'm going to be a judge for the National Book Award. So I'm kind of gearing up to read a lot over the summer.
You mentioned interviewing. I was curious about what the process of preparing for and then interviewing other writers, how that lends itself to your own curiosity that goes into your creative process.
So thinking about, how I'll interview. So I'll be interviewing her at the AWP conference, which is a network of creative writing organizations and writers who are not affiliated with academic programs. So, it should be a fun, low-key interview that gets to show off Amy's best work and her thoughts and feelings on writing, and to have an engaging conversation with somebody you've been friends with for 15 years. So I'm trying to figure out that balance. But again, going through somebody else's work and looking at how they've changed from their first book to their most recent work is interesting. So, you can sort of see how they change in style, how they grow. First books are really precious and lovely. And then each book has their own, it has their own motion to it. So, all of that is, I don't know how that will influence my writing personally, but I'm open to all of it. So I might just learn and take care of the interview in this week. And then who knows what I'll write about the week after when I get home and I can decompress. It all kind of goes into the mix.
Right. As you're talking, I am curious about more things that you're saying. So if someone wants to give me a time that, or I'll just keep asking questions. Okay, I was also curious if you ever did, or if you still feel fear about the vulnerability in the way that you express yourself.
Well, no. Well, let me just say this. I don't release any poems that, that are truly, that would I don't know, embarrass anybody or open up too many questions. I mean, that to me, for me, is not poetry. That is something else. So, actually, I lost I was thinking through the question and then I forgot your question. What was your question?
Sure, it was just if you ever did, or if you still do experience any fear about the vulnerability in the way that you express yourself.
No, I feel like I can write about anything, but what gets published or what I share with a friend in a workshop, that's a different story. I mean, I think all the poems should be written, but not all of them need to be public. So I'd rather go down that path and see what works and, what makes a good poem. The thing that I tend to do now, which I don't know is probably not great, but like now I almost look at every situation and like, oh, that could be a poem. My, I tripped down the stairs, that could be a poem. Or, I don't know, my daughter is grumpy today, that could be a poem. So sometimes that's not exactly fair. But those don't necessarily make good poetry either. But it's fun to think about everything as a potential poem and then try to see if that's really true.
Yeah.
Then sometimes so I don't have any fear about that stuff. I don't think there's a topic I'm afraid to write about, but I also have to feel like I want to write about that topic.
January, hold on a second, Arian. January, we didn't know about this interview until a couple of days earlier. So are you okay with it? You still have time?
For what? For this interview? Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's Saturday. I'm at home. I'm not doing anything. I have no life.
I didn't tell you about this. Oh.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
I mean, I could wrap it up with a few more questions.
That's fine. I'm in no hurry. I don't want to keep anybody else too long, but I'm in no hurry.
You mentioned that maybe it's not always a good thing to look at every moment as if it could be a poem. What is the danger in that, do you think?
It's almost, what I like to do. So for example, I really do like Instagram.
Yeah.
I like to take pictures because I feel like it's an extension of my creativity, not necessarily because it will, I'll get a bunch of likes and stuff. Just like poetry, I look at it as, this is sort of an extension of my art. But because of that means I'm always looking for an opportunity to take a picture. And so I'm not really in the moment. So sometimes with writing, if you're constantly looking for the poem, then you might not be living. You might not be, so.
Okay. I guess one final question then. Looking back, how have you noticed your work evolve? Can you give certain characteristics to your early writing and kind of talk about how it's changed?
I may have said this earlier in the workshop, but my first book was a typical first book. So it was all the experience I had had to that point in 2009. So I was married, I was happily married. I had 2 young kids. I was trying to work, I was trying to balance a lot of things. So my book kind of reflects that. I talk about my parents more in that book than I do in anything I've done later. The second book, but by the second book, I had had more experiences. So I was probably writing about the same things, just different perspectives. I also had divorced too, so my take on love was different. But I was still writing about love and losing love. And then in my third book, that is more about, coming back stronger in the broken places. So, though that's content-wise. When you physically look at my poems in my first book, I write a lot in columns. And at some point I figured out that, we kind of all write a little bit like our teachers, because, we're told to, take in all those experiences and, whatever that comes out to be, that ends up being your voice, your style. So my teachers were Sharon Olds and Phil Levine and Galway Cannell. And for the most part, they always wrote in columns. Maybe Galway didn't, but Phil and Sharon did. Rarely would they break up things in stanzas. So my book feels like that. By the second or third book, I'm writing in, 2-line stanzas, 3-line stanzas, staggering my, tabbing out my lines. Maybe a prose poem here or there. Maybe I try, a formal poem. But I could see that physical evolution, of how the poetry looks on the page from the first book to what I'm writing now.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for answering. That's really cool to think about, you finding your rhythm, like even
yeah.
shift
Yeah.
so important. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and answering my questions.
Well, thank you for asking. And it's always fun to think about like how your style changes over time. So I appreciate the questions.
Of course.
Thank you, honey. You did a very good interview. I'm glad I can hear you now.
It was a very good interview. So the questions were
Very
great.
thoughtful questions and very good questions. January, thank you for your patience. Thank you for being such a wonderful presenter and poet. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of you in the future.